Society's Multifaceted View on Mental Illness by Katie, Lauren, Holly, and Jordan. The phenomena of mental illness is ambiguous in that it is difficult for society to accept a definition of mental illness. And even further, it is difficult for society to integrate the mentally ill into many aspects of civilization in a safe and unburdensome manner, such as the workplace. That being said, it is important for all individuals and organizations to understand the phenomena of mental illness because it is a prominent factor in society. The National Alliance on Mental Illness says that 1 in 5 adults experience a mental health condition every year, and 1 in 20 lives with a serious mental illness such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It is crucial for people to know how to react or treat the mentally ill, specifically if they're a member of a mentally ill person's family or community. The National Alliance on Mental Illness defines a mental illness as a condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, or mood, and may affect his or her ability to relate to others and function on a daily basis. Each person will have different experiences, even people with the same diagnosis. Our sociology textbook, You May Ask Yourself, 4th edition by Dalton Conley, speaks to the topic of mental illness by expressing that mental illness is a tricky subject because its place in society has always been ambiguous. The label mentally ill was formerly reserved for individuals whose behavior were considered bizarre or otherwise unnatural. Asylums were used to house society's undesirables. With the work of Sigmund Freud and the advent of psychoanalysis, mental illness came to be seen, at least in the medical community, as one end of a continuum rather than one category in a dichotomy of sane versus insane persons. Diagnostic psychiatry, now the prevailing paradigm, treats mental illness much like any other illness, identifying its symptoms and prescribing treatment. In light of these perspectives and definitions, one must consider the following questions. How severe do one's symptoms have to be considered mentally ill? Is mental illness hereditary or a cause of socialization? At what age does mental illness develop? Can a traumatizing event cause mental illness, whether an emotional event or even a physical event like a car accident? Can someone recover from mental illness? What are the most effective and efficient methods of treatment? What social obstacles and discrimination do mentally ill people face? Do different cultures perceive and diagnose mental illness differently?
The effect of society's view on individuals who have mental illness vary, but are mostly negative. Some major issues the mentally ill face are prejudices due to negative stigmas, such as social exclusions and job discriminations. A survey of 1,700 adults in the UK, circa 2000, conducted by CRISP, explored society's view on individuals with mental disabilities. The data collected through the study expressed that the most common belief was that the mentally ill were dangerous, which specifically referred to those with schizophrenia and substance abuse. The survey also found that another common belief was that mental illness, such as substance abuse or eating disorders, were self-inflicted, and that the mentally ill were generally difficult to communicate with. These stigmas surrounding the mentally handicapped factor into how they are viewed legally or in the workplace. Legally, the mentally ill are misrepresented, which is evident through legislature's enactment of laws restricting civil rights and opportunities of the disabled individuals. A study directed by Hemmons in 2002 attempted to determine how many states partook in the restriction of civil rights among the mentally ill based off 5 broad categories: voting, holding office, serving jury duty, parenting, and marriage rights. The results were that 19 states revoked voting privileges, 16 states revoked the disabled's abilities to hold office, 17 states did not allow the handicapped individuals to serve a jury, and 21 states restricted parenting rights along with marriage rights. Discrimination in the workplace is another major negative effect based off the stigmas of mental health. These stigmas can lead to mistreatment, lack of job opportunities, and discrimination against people with certain mental disorders. A study conducted by Show Trust shows that 40% of employers see mental health as a significant risk for a company. However, the study also showed that 42% of employers underestimate the prevalence of mental illness. The evidence portrays that a general lack of understanding as to what mental illness truly is leads to this mistreatment of and negative categorization of the mentally ill throughout society.
National surveys have been tracking the public attitudes in regards to mental illness since the 1950s. In order to control for accurate responses, even though times were changing, the questions kept their original wording to ensure that they were exactly the same each time the survey was conducted. In the 1950s, there wasn't a strong understanding of mental illness, and the results showed this. The people surveyed were unable to identify others as being mentally ill unless they were displayed with extreme forms of behavior. By 1966, Americans had a better understanding of what was considered mental illness. The public attributed mental illness to a mixture of biological differences along with social and psychological stress. However, compared to the 1950 survey, the public thought the mentally ill to be more strongly tied to violent behavior. Why? If there is a greater understanding of mental illness, is there such a strong stigma associated with it? You might be wondering, are people with mental disorders more violent? While there is a slight elevated risk with individuals suffering from severe mental illness, there is a very little risk of violence or harm to a stranger from casual contact with an individual who has a mental disorder. And to put this all in perspective, the overall contribution of mental disorders to the total level of violence in society is exceptionally small. So why is there such a fear of violence when it comes to the mentally ill? One possible contributor could be the media coverage. There's evidence of selective media coverage being the reason for the existence of people's stereotypes towards the mentally ill. Remember, these results are from a 1966 survey, and the stigmas associated with mental disorders might have been greater today had it not been for a more scientific understanding being taught through public education. It's easy to see the stigmas associated with mental illness, but it's more difficult to understand how individuals with mental disorders are affecting this perception of themselves. Unfortunately, as evident through what we just discussed, individuals don't have much control over how society views them. By following Parsons' sick role and simply going through the motions of what is expected of them, the mentally ill still suffer from a strong stigmatization. Why is this? According to society, if a person is sick, the expectation is that they will eventually get better. The people who suffer from mental disorders most likely will never get better in the sense that they will always be subject to their illness. There is no escaping the biological factors that contribute to the person's carrying specific traits. The factors responsible for how mentally ill individuals affect society are the ways in which their persons are identified and further categorized or even ostracized.
Theoretical approaches of sociology not only help us to understand the phenomenon at large, but they also help to shed light through perspectives that may not be commonly considered. It's no secret that there's a stigma created around those with a mental illness. However, there are also disparities amongst those with an illness as well. The conflict perspective, which arose from Karl Marx, attempts to look at situations as having two different groups, the oppressors and the oppressed, and how the competition or conflict between the two labels and affects them. We can obviously sort the population into those with and without mental illness. Those with any type of mental disorder have to work much harder to fit into society and the everyday life that those without come about much easier. Because many of those affected by a mental illness have outward signs, others around them are able to pass judgment without knowing a thing about them. There are so many measurable differences between those with and without mental illness that the list could continue on. However, Assistant Professor Bessa of Allen University points out that the conflict theory can be taken further and distinguished between the numbers of men and women affected by mental illness. Because a higher percentage of women are affected, there is an inequality between the genders. Bessa found that researchers took this information and conducted a study on why there would be such a difference. They were able to find that the roles men and women play in society take a huge toll on women. Men tend to hold the majority of the power in a household, which creates dominance over the woman. This power struggle is shown to lead to higher levels of mental illness in women. Symbolic interactionism also brings an interesting take to the understanding of mental illness within a population. The main focus of this theory is the relationship between humans and society. Also, with the symbolic interactionism theory, there isn't just one reality, but instead many interpretations of different situations. The book A Primer of Social Problems applied this theory to the problem of mental health. The conclusion was that there were no definite mental conditions. Instead, society looks at those who deviate from the norm as different. This difference then establishes a mental illness which is created by society to set the deviants apart. As an example, the book mentioned ADHD and its increasing popularity in society. However, before the introduction of Ritalin, the most common drug for ADHD patients, this disease didn't exist. Simply put, ADHD is a social construction which only creates a divide between individuals, especially school-aged children.
Fall is here, hear the yell, back to school, ring the bell, brand new shoes, walking blues, climb the fence, books and pens, I can tell that we are gonna be friends. I can tell that we are gonna be friends. Walk with me, Susie Lee, through the park and by the tree. We will rest upon the ground and look at all the bugs we found. Safely walk to school without a sound. Safely walk to school without a sound. Here we are, no one else. We walk to school.
A personal experience I have with mental disability was through nannying for a young boy, 7 years old, with sensory motor autism. During my time working with the child, I learned a lot about the condition and realized I myself had certain misconceptions of what exactly autism was and how it affected those with the condition. The main thing I learned was that even with the disability, the child was incredibly intelligent and could live an amazing, fulfilling life. The child was young, but could tell me more about wildlife and history than I could ever attempt to memorize. This experience taught me that although one may be plagued with a mental disability, the individual can still be highly functional and an outstanding member of society. Gail, the boy, struggled with sensory overload, therefore struggled with public places due to the immense influx of sound, but this never stopped him from exploring gardens and quiet museums where he could fully devote himself. He was able to create his own beautiful life, and although living with a mental illness, is able to function highly on his own personal level.
Bugs and alphabet. When I wake tomorrow, I'll bet that you and I will